Listener discretion advised.
If you've been affected by the rampant opioid epidemic, as we have, then this podcast is for you. We want to bring hope to those suffering from heroin addiction and shed light on its darkness. Let's share an environment where we can discuss all aspects of heroin addiction without shame or judgment. Our mission is to educate the community about heroin and its deadly sidekick, fentanyl. How easy it is to get, how easy it is to become addicted, the latest treatments, and its newest targets. JCF is a nonprofit organization created to honor the life of Jeremy Castro, who passed away from a fentanyl overdose in 2017. Now, my family and I are doing our part to combat this opioid epidemic. I'm Rebecca Castro. I lost my brother and many friends to heroin, and I made this show to demand eradication of this epidemic. Let's do this. Today on our show, we have Colleen Murphy, who is with the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Colleen.
My pleasure.
So we'll just go ahead and jump right in. And can you go ahead and just give us a little bit of your background and how you got started in the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you for having me today. It's been quite a journey to get to where I am today. I knew from a very young age that I wanted to do work to help our community, and I thought I'd go more the diplomatic route, and I'm from D.C. originally, so I thought I would work for either the Peace Corps or the State Department or things like that, but just through Kismet, ended up working in public health from the onset, and really saw the intersection of health and human rights and the importance of being healthy in order to get civil rights, the right to vote, the right to education. Those things were really important. So kind of through some other Kismet, ended up working in HIV at the height of the epidemic in Africa, and really saw the intersections of poverty, of disenfranchisement, and access as major reasons for the epidemic, but also saw what community mobilization resources and commitment could really do. So when I moved to Los Angeles, I was doing this work and kind of went back and forth between domestic HIV work and work in Africa. And funding was drying up here in LA, and so I had a couple choices of either moving back to DC and continuing on that journey or trying something new. And through some interesting connections, ended up working in homeless services. And originally I didn't really intend to do this work for a long time. I thought it would be a stopgap until I got back more into HIV or health work, and quickly realized this was a health issue. It was an access issue. All the things I'd been fighting for my entire life, they were happening in this cause too. And I had some of the skills that I could bring forward. So it's been about 8 years since I've been doing this work, and it's been some of the most rewarding work of my life.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, even like I said earlier, reading your CV, like you have to really be a selfless person to do this type of work. You know what I mean? So thank you for doing it.
Yeah, thank you. And I understand that homelessness rose 12% this year in Los Angeles.
It did. I think there's been a lot of work to address the homeless crisis, but unfortunately, what we call inflow, which is people newly becoming homeless, has really, we've seen huge increases in new homelessness. So even though we permanently housed over 22,000 people last year, 22,000. So we have so many people doing amazing work that we can't keep up with the inflow of people becoming newly homeless. For those who are on the streets, which is what I specialize in, we saw a 25% increase in people who are newly homeless in the last year.
Wow.
So people assume that the folks that you see on the streets are, been out there 10, 15, 5 years, but we are seeing a new type of person experiencing homelessness on our streets. So it's So the good news is we're doing really great work, but we really have to look at some of the reasons why people are falling into homelessness and stop it there. And I think there's some of the same causes that cause substance use disorder, mental health issues, and some of the structural issues that are really hurting our communities.
Absolutely.
So the new people that became homeless this year, what are some of the reasons that they don't have a home?
It's an affordability crisis. It is access to affordable housing. LA has the widest gap between income and cost of living than any other city in the United States. And so I say it's a math issue. It's that we have to have incomes keep up with cost of living. And if people can't keep up with that and there's no mechanism for rents to stay stable, that people are falling out of their apartments. And already we have so many of our Angelenos who are already on the edge that it just takes one medical crisis, one extra challenge on them that it breaks the back.
Right.
We also see, though, for certain groups like our young people, our foster care system people when they age out, that also there's not a strong safety net. Older adults, too, they're on fixed incomes, so they don't have the capacity to really increase income like us who are working. Mm-hmm. So those fixed incomes also aren't keeping up. And, the cost of medical care. And then, of course, substance use disorder is part of it, mental health crises. So it's a very complicated mix that is leading to, and I think people are looking for the answer like, oh, it's this. Because if you have a very finite or only certain reasons, then you can find the silver bullet.
Right.
But every person, their story is different, and the intervention needed is different.
Right. So are you seeing whole families on the street?
Absolutely.
That is so sad.
And so we do work really hard to make sure we can get them off the streets. We do prioritize families for motels and things of that order. But again, over the last couple of years, the number of families who are falling into crisis, we can't keep up with it. And so it's troubling because we're seeing every single group increasing for the most part. I think the only flat line was veterans, but before we used to have maybe this group would increase, but this group would decrease. And for a while, we were doing really good work with our families, but nowadays it's just everyone is experiencing the crisis.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when you say you housed 22,000 people, where do you put them?
Great question. So some people what we call self-resolve with a little bit of intervention and maybe going back to family here locally. I think there's a misnomer that people experiencing homelessness in LA are from somewhere else, but the majority of people are Angelenos. They were housed in Los Angeles prior to becoming homeless. So we may reconnect them to that or help them get work and find an apartment. And then those who need more longer-term supports, we have something called rapid rehousing, where we do case management. We give other types of financial supports like job training, and then some short-term rental assistance so that people can get back on their feet. And a lot of the families we serve, that's the program that they'll be enrolled in. And those who are more sick, more vulnerable, and really won't be able to, sustain themselves with those interventions, we would then move to what's called permanent supportive housing. And again, that's two different models. There's one where it's a one building where people are there and there's case management on site. And then there's what's called scattered site, which is in an apartment that something like what I live in, and case management will come to them. So it's really geared towards what the person needs. But unfortunately, you need affordable housing to do this. And I think prior to the real estate crisis, we could put people in affordable apartments, and they did really quite well. But if people can't continue with their rents because the rents are so high, they can then fall back into homelessness.
Right.
Yes.
So there's really a push to have more affordable housing and to build that. But regardless, while it's hard, we're still doing. We did it 22,000 times with one of those models, and those are all good things. Some people think that those that self-resolve or resolve with limited, that somehow you shouldn't celebrate that as much as the person in permanent supportive housing, but we don't have enough resources for everyone. So any resolution is a great
good thing.
win.
Should be taken as a win,
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
I agree.
So how are you funding this? How is all this housing funded?
It's a compilation of different funding sources. You might remember there was a big injection of funds called Measure H, and that was sales tax that a quarter of a cent was added that funded a lot of the supportive services that I'm speaking about. Like my program around outreach is exclusively funded through Measure H. But the city of LA supports it. We get federal funds, we get state funds. There's a new injection of state funds. So it is definitely a lot of new funding resources, thankfully, where a few years ago, many of these funding resources didn't exist. But again, some of this lies outside of the system, where we need to get landlords to support this work. We need affordable housing,
Right.
and also, we haven't talked about shelter yet, but also communities to accept shelter.
So do you accept private donations? Or is that allowed?
Well, a lot of our community partners, we do this work in close collaboration with local organizations that are doing the work day in, day out. We fund a lot of it, we support it, we provide technical assistance, policy around it, and it's our people that we fund that actually are doing most of the boots on the ground work. Okay. And so many of them do, and many have volunteer opportunities. So anybody that cares about the issue could look at their local homeless organization and ask them what they need. I think the key is asking them what they need, because sometimes people have ideas of what should be given,
What they
that
think.
which may not align with needs. So I always urge people, ask, and you'd be surprised at what an agency needs. It could be something really small, but boy, it can make all the difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. So if somebody had a property, say a house, a 4-bedroom house in the valley, or within LA County, would they be able to open that up to you? Would they have to qualify to do that? Like pass inspection or something?
There are some rules around it, but yes, there's a few ways it could be. That landlord could rent under a rapid rehousing program, and yes, it would have to pass a minimal inspection, but absolutely. There's also a program that People Assisting the Homeless, or PATH, they have called LAHSA, where landlords can put their units into that program, and then it's almost like the Match.com of landlords to homeless service providers who are looking for a unit. And so LAHSA is a pretty new program, but is showing really great results. And then also, if somebody's interested in being part of the Section 8 program, they could look into the city or the county to see how they can become a Section 8 landlord also.
That's great.
That's a great idea.
So
That whole app.
Getting back to the house thing, I'm just trying to understand. So if someone did have a 4-bedroom house in the valley, and could they rent out rooms, or does it have to be the whole thing? So maybe it could house, 4 different couples, or a mom with her kids or something. Okay, so
Absolutely.
Well, that's very good.
Yeah, so as long as that person has a lease, and that's the key. There's also some groups. There's a group called Share Self-Help that also does some master leasing, where it's shared rental properties too. So there's definitely a lot of ways that landlords could get involved.
Very creative ways.
Absolutely.
That's great. Great. So what do you think is the leading drivers of homelessness? Did we cover that?
It's interesting because I think, well, I guess I'll ask you, what do you think are the leading drivers of homelessness? Because usually what I find is what people think often doesn't match with the statistics.
When I see a person on the street, I think, first thing, I think they have no family. They have no support group.
The first thing I think is drug user.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, totally honest. That's the first thing I think is like they must have been in a bad place or something. You know what I mean? That's what I think.
Yeah. And then the second thing I think of is funds. They lost a job, their husband died that supported them, whatever. It was a financial thing. But my first thing is that they don't have any support group, because I would never let anyone in my family, no matter how poor I was,
Which is,
be on the street.
now that I say it out loud, it honestly sounds on my part a little judgmental, because it's the same thing with our foundation. We're trying to rid this negative stigma of heroin addicts and things, but here I am thinking I see someone on the streets, and you literally just said it's because of the housing and how expensive it is.
And another thing is so many families and so many people are like one paycheck away from being without a home. Mm-hmm. Gone are the days where you have to have, 6 months salary in the bank and all that. I think those days, for the most part,
I don't even think
are
it's
gone.
possible anymore.
Well,
it's possible, but it's
well,
not
of course
the way
it's
people
possible, but yeah, a lot of, and I'm talking middle class people too. It's paycheck to paycheck, and then boom, that bump comes in the road, and you got no family, and there you are. It's really sad to even think about.
Absolutely. And I appreciate your honesty, because to be honest, when I started this work too, I knew nothing. And I think I had a lot of preconceived notions on what led people to homelessness. And everybody's journey is different. And I think it's really hard to say what was the one thing, because I think what we often see, it's actually all the things that you've said. And it's hard to know what led to what. So it could have been, as you said, the start of loss of a paycheck. That then triggered other things. Family could have left. That could have triggered use of substances because you're depressed, right? And then you hard time to get out, find a job because you're depressed, and then you end up on the streets. That then makes your substance use worse, or your mental health use worse. I think it's what comes first, the chicken or the egg. I think a lot of people assume it's substance use. Our stats actually show us that actually, less than a quarter report that they have a substance use issue.
Wow.
However, a quarter of a lot of people, still a lot of people who need help. And I think also what we see, maybe folks are either struggling with substance use disorder or mental health, or both, and it's hard to understand which one it is,
Right.
Or is it both? And then also it's what came first. Did their addiction or mental health lead them to be on the streets, or by being on the streets and the traumas that are there led to those things, or exasperated?
Yes.
And so, but I would say in most cases, somebody I really look up to who works in this issue, who suffered from substance use disorder and now is, quite senior in a homeless organization, talks about his trauma. And that's really what it was. So I think a lot of underpinning this work is trauma. So I appreciate that your foundation is looking at how do you take the stigma away, because I think a lot of people, it's easy to stigmatize folks living on the streets, because personifying folks makes it really painful. When you think of them as a mother or a father, or, it almost makes it easier to sleep at night. And I get it, because it's a lot to take in. But I think we have an opportunity to realize that folks are just like us, and the traumas and the feelings and the substance use challenges and all those things are things that people who are housed also experience too. And so there's not a lot of difference between us who have a roof over our heads and those who do not.
That's Such a great way to put it. Really, it's so true. It's the same exact thing with drug addiction. Like, no one, this family of 5 and we eat dinner all the time. No one thought it would be us, but it's literally a problem that people don't want to face because it's a negative thing, right? And they can't really relate necessarily. But since we've come out with our story, we've had so many people opening up and relating. And I think it's because they're doing that now, because we're kind of saying, like, it happened, we're not ashamed, and we're not going to sit back. We want to do something about it. And now everyone else wants to be more open about it. So it's kind of like starting that conversation. But it's crazy. It really is crazy to think, like you said, it's like we all have the same problems, and just because they're where they are doesn't make us any different,
Right.
Absolutely. And I just applaud what you're doing, because I think we have to just talk about it. We have to understand that people who are having a tougher time in life, that doesn't make them less of a human being.
Exactly.
Or less worthy of supports or love
or
help in that. I'm a big fan of also just trying to help people know that homelessness doesn't equate to criminal activity, and just like criminal activity exists, that there are plenty of people experiencing homelessness who are actually more likely to be victims of crime and more victims of things against them. So I think we have a really great opportunity to change the narrative and educate and empower and inspire people.
And it's definitely time, right?
Absolutely.
To do that. So can you explain the conditions of living on the street, such as having to find food, struggling with health issues, access to hygiene and sanitation, that type of thing?
Think about the times that you're out and about and you need a bio break and you need to find a place to go to the bathroom. That in itself is a challenge. But then we're dressed nice, so somebody's going to let us in if we ask nicely to use their bathroom. But many people who are experiencing homelessness, they have biases against them, so the employer isn't probably going to say yes. So people are constantly trying to hustle to find places to go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, to wash, because I would say shower, but shower options are very limited. So it might be a bathing in a sink, to just try it. And think about if you're trying to find work, just trying to get yourself showered and put together for a job interview. Or many people experiencing homelessness are working, so trying to keep up hygiene is such a challenge. And so we're also doing a lot of work to see how we can expand hygiene opportunities for people on the streets. It's 45,000 people who are all looking for that bathroom, all looking for a place to wash their hands, something that we take for granted. So we're working really hard to figure out how to strategically do this. And there's some really innovative work already happening. It's just not enough. So how can we also open up existing brick and mortar, like showers and bathrooms at parks and other places? People are also resilient. If they have funds, they will get a gym membership, and so use that as a place, which can be very helpful. But I think that piece of trying to hustle just to take care of your basic things takes up so much of your day. So it's hard to then think about healing or recovery or moving past, because you're spending so much of your day. And then where do you put your stuff? You have your stuff, so where does that go? Because if you leave it, somebody could take it, it could be removed. So people then are challenged of, do I stay with my stuff or do I go out to try to take care of my daily needs? So looking into safe storage opportunities too. That was one of the things I was doing this morning, is trying to strategically identify some places where we could do safe storage. So
that's a great idea.
I would have never even thought
of that. I know. And honestly, if it took that much work to take a bath, how many people would just stop trying?
Exactly.
Like, it's just,
I think it's really interesting that you said that there's some people who are even still working, that just to again, keep that job, like to try and find somewhere to clean themselves or hygiene. Like
that
wow,
would be really
I couldn't
hard.
even imagine.
That would be really hard to carry on, that persona that you're together and show up for your job on time, clean and ready to work.
I think
That's
of myself
really
when they, the water's off in your apartment building just for a day and how, much in a bad mood I am.
Yes.
An inconvenience it is. We don't even realize.
Or your internet. When your internet goes out, forget it.
Oh my gosh.
My whole day's ruined.
That's our biggest thing is the internet.
I can't do anything.
So I think it's those things that we're really trying to look harder at. How do we, those basic human rights of because it also instills dignity, right? And
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of really great programs. There's a group called Shower of Hope, and that's another volunteer opportunity where they do showers throughout the community. And it really just is a great opportunity for people to get a shower, to use the restroom, and connect to a care manager if they need it.
How do they do that? How do they do showers?
So there's mobile vans that are actually full shower. It's very, very cool.
Really?
Yeah, there's also a group called LAHSA that originally came from San Francisco, but there's a few groups now doing it. We also are, I'm not sure if it's out yet, but there are these FEMA trailers also that were used for showers that we've also deployed also. So trying to find some creative
That's
ways.
very creative. Well, that is inspiring.
And many
really,
of those are
to see.
volunteer-based, where the volunteers are there, passing out towels and supplies, and just being a warm, welcoming face to folks coming to use the facilities.
I love to hear that humans are just being kind to each other.
Me too.
Without saying you don't deserve it or you deserve it or judging
Or getting
how they
something in return.
or getting something in return. I mean, I love to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
So
I like that you
again,
said
thanks for
that.
your work.
Well, it's many other people. I just get to
Yeah.
talk about it. So they inspire me every day. I think we have to do more to get these good stories out there, because I think the naysayers and the NIMBYs, their voice often is stronger than our own. And so I think I'm excited to have the opportunity to share some of this good news, but we do need a lot more of it. It's definitely not enough. So I think if everybody did something to support this, whether it was voting, showing up to their neighborhood council, their city council, supporting affordable housing, shelter placement, and really mobilizing around it, volunteering, supporting, we could really move mountains.
Absolutely. I agree.
Well, I know, like, as far as the addicts go, so many times they're kicked out of the family home. The family cannot deal with it anymore and feel like they're maybe enabling the person, so they're kicked out and they have no place to go. So they end up on the street. Do you see a lot of drug use going on, like on the streets in the homeless community?
I mean, substance use disorder is, of course, an important thing that we are contending with. Like I said, I think at the beginning, I focus a lot on street outreach. And so my teams that are out there doing outreach every day, they're trained to really support people with whatever's going on. And often it's not just one thing or two things or three things or four things. It's a host of things. And so they have to decide from a care management point what that client is ready to look at first, because everything we do is voluntary. So it's kind of figuring out with the client, what are you ready for? And if substance use is there, we'll talk about it if they're willing to, and if they're not ready to address it, we'll work on something else. We believe in something called a housing first model, and so whether somebody's ready to address it or not, we feel that getting them indoors is the most important thing, because as we said, there's so many other things and triggers that getting yourself healthy and off substances is really, really hard when you're on the streets. There's also risk reduction. So it may be somebody's not willing to stop using immediately, but maybe it's minimizing the use and trying to figure out ways of weaning off. But of course, we want to be there when somebody is ready to say yes, whether it's for substance use disorder or something else. The challenge, though, is not enough beds to handle detox and substance use. But my teams will hustle and be on that phone calling every single site possible. But, our shelters that LAHSA funds and our partners, the Department of Health Services and Department of Mental Health, they're what we call low barrier, so it doesn't require sobriety, which is really important also because we want people to come indoors, and then we'll work with them and when they're ready to talk through sobriety, being with them, but it's not a prerequisite for help. And that's a real evidence-based approach that that's the way you want your programs to be. And there's something called stages of change. So our teams are trained on being aware of what the stages of change are for that person and trying to propel people through those stages. The first stage is I'm not even aware I have an issue, and somebody may be there. So it's important to identify if that's their stage. And your job then is to figure out, okay, let's make you more aware, in a delicate, thoughtful way. And then let's say somebody becomes aware of their challenge, but they're not ready to move towards this. That's okay. We'll work with them until they're ready to activate. And then once they're ready to activate, we're ready to go. Again, is the resource there to help them? That could be the problem, but we'll keep working on it. Right. And then there's what's called maintenance. So it means you're actually this is the model for all addictive issues, whether it's drugs, whether it's food, my own exercise.
Definitely.
I don't need to work out. Yeah. It's fine. And so that's really what we need to do. And so, but again, substance use may be one of many, many things that we're contending with. And so it may be more important to help with their mental health needs and get them connected to a mental health therapist. It could be, so it's like a little bit like Jenga, right, where we're trying to
So it's case by case, you'd say.
Case by case.
Again, that's one thing too I really love is talking to some of the other people we have. You have to understand it's case by case. You can't take one thing and try, oh, this person's on drugs and they're homeless. Oh, we're going to make them better and do whatever. It's like a two-way thing, They have to participate up to a certain extent. But I really love that you say it's not like a prerequisite or anything that they have to be off drugs to get any sort of help. Because like you said, it's probably multiple things. And I mean, I couldn't have imagined being homeless, but that in itself is such a big thing. So I think it's great that you guys even still stick with that and focus on that. And then and then we'll figure the rest out as it comes, as they're ready. Because I don't know a lot about this, so you're educating me a lot, but I feel like that's a very open way of thinking. Because I feel like on the other end, I'm so used to people being told no because, they, did this or they have to be this or whatever it is.
Exactly. There's so many, so much red tape you have to go through to get help.
Just to help.
But I wanted to back up a little bit. When you say, if somebody needs detox or something and your team is on the phone calling everybody, who are they calling? Are they calling rehab centers? Are they calling hospitals? Are they calling all of that?
Yeah, so there are community programs through the public health department where there are different types of treatment beds. And so we will call those, of course, starting with ones closest to where that person is, and then going out further and further. And again, depending on what they need, right, that will determine what their eligibility is. So these are, public funded programs.
So the general public, like me or our foundation, we could provide funds for a scholarship bed in some of these facilities.
I
with
think that's
the facility.
I think that's a fascinating idea to explore. To be honest, I don't understand or I don't work in the funding mechanisms, but I think that might be something really exciting to explore further.
Well, yeah, it'd be great if you had a list and, we're able to fund, this hospital or that, whatever, X amount of dollars, and the people can come in
And
you got more than enough people, right?
And her team does what, like Julie was saying, Julie's a substance abuse counselor, where they basically, because she says, okay, she gets these addicts who are finally ready to, and then they're ready to go themselves, and then they don't have a bed or somewhere to put them.
Right.
So, it reminds me when you say they're calling places, that's what Julie said. Like, she calls, that's where they start, the closest places. If they don't have them, they just keep going and going. But it's very scary that you can get to that point where you're ready to help someone, and then we just don't have resources. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's definitely
the problem we're
scarcity,
facing, right?
Yeah, it's scarcity, but I've seen some amazing creative work out there too to help people, and I've seen people get into shelter for a few days while they're waiting for a bed too.
Okay, that's great.
And help people, So there's, it's not all doom and gloom, but definitely, the more resources we have to help and the quicker we can move. Because one of the things I've seen, and nothing breaks my heart when I'm out there on the streets, is when somebody says yes and we can't find the bed, because we know that decision will probably change in a day.
Exactly. That's exactly how my cousin Julie was explaining it. Like, for an addict, it takes so long to mentally get there where you're ready. She's like, you have the smallest time frame to get them in. So that's exactly what she was saying, is you're in that time frame, they're there, and then you don't have somewhere to put them. Like, she's like, their minds could change in a matter of an hour, and they're just like, nope, don't want to do this. So that's the whole urgency behind it, right? Is making sure that you keep it rolling.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The whole process.
Another question I have is, when you refer people out for treatment, are these doctors or providers, do they do that on a pro bono basis? Do you have like a group of doctors who will help you out with that, with the fees?
So the programs we're referring to are, public programs. So it's usually, I believe, covered under Medi-Cal. And thankfully, through the Affordable Care Act, most people experiencing homelessness are covered under Medi-Cal. That was a big game changer a few years ago.
Yeah.
So, and again, I don't get involved in the whole billing and how it all happens. I just know how to get people there.
Right.
I let them figure out the funding piece. Because outreach workers are the great connectors. And so we have to know all systems, whether it's how to get connected to benefits like general relief, get connected to Medi-Cal, get connected to substance use, get to a shelter. They have to know every single piece and be able to know on a turn of a dime how to do that. So we have a lot of breadth, but in some cases not the depth, because our partners are the ones who figure all of that out.
Right.
Absolutely. Makes sense.
So is your team actually out on the street, like canvassing and talking to these people?
Absolutely. So for the last few years, LA's is very different than most cities. We have, New York has more people experiencing homelessness, but many of their people are in shelters because they have what they call the right to shelter. And because of the weather, I think, too, plays a role, because winters in New York are really rough. 75% of our homeless are street-based. And we didn't really have an infrastructure to handle the number of people who were on the streets. And that includes people in their vehicles, the RVs, as well as in tents and makeshift shelters, or literally on the streets. And so when we started out thinking about what really our homeless system should look like a few years ago, especially when we saw there was a mechanism to have more revenues, that's when I got involved in how do we have a street-based strategy and what it would take to really serve that 75% of the population, and what should that look like. And it's been quite an adventure. And so over the last 2.5 years, we've built up an outreach infrastructure of over 160 teams that are serving the county.
Oh my
that
gosh.
may sound like a lot, but if you think about how big from Antelope Valley to Long Beach, San Gabriel Valley, all the way out to the tippy tip of Malibu, it's a lot of ground to cover.
Wow.
It is.
It's a lot of people. And so we had to first figure out how many people we'd need, hire them all, train them. We also added in specialists. And we created, with our partners, Department of Health Services and Department of Mental Health, a new type of outreach called multidisciplinary teams, where traditionally outreach workers were just Jack and Jills of all trades. But now the multidisciplinary teams not only have generalists on it, but have a mental health therapist, a substance use counselor, and a physical health professional to beef up the teams. And so we've been building those up, and then just getting enough generalists out there, and then training. Also figuring out our infrastructure is a lot of different agencies, so we needed some infrastructure that brought it all together versus teams kind of falling all over each other, competing with each other. So that's what I've been doing too, is creating an infrastructure. So we have outreach coordinators in each region of the county, being really air traffic control and trying to think through what this looks like. And so these teams are out there now. The majority are working Monday through Friday because that's when all the things are open, because they're connecting to the DMV to get IDs, getting general relief. So, but we do have a skeleton crew that are working on the weekends. Also, we have 2 teams per region working over the weekends too, just to kind of offset that. And then we also created an outreach portal that allows, people like you who see somebody experiencing homelessness that you're worried about, that maybe you drive by every day and boy, he or she doesn't look too great and needs some help, that you can put in a request for outreach, and an outreach worker would come in a few days. So those requests are funneled to our outreach coordinators. They then assign it to one of those teams that serves that area, and the teams have kind of like beats. So they have sub-regions that they're proactively working in every day. So they tend to know the people who are in that region. And before all of this, we didn't have enough outreach. We didn't have a plan. We didn't even use the same database. We didn't have outreach coordinators. So we've built this up and didn't have a portal. So
that's fantastic.
The system that you put together is fantastic.
I know.
Really. It seems like that with so much work that you're doing and so many people you're handling, it really seems like the best way with the different teams, because obviously you can't do everything. You know what I mean? You have all the ideas, but it's really good. I really like how you broke it down.
It's working, but then we also have to have places to put people. So that's the next piece, is that we're excited to have the supportive services and to help people in time of need. But again, it comes back to shelter and permanent housing. And so we're really excited to continue that conversation about the importance that outreach is a piece of a balanced breakfast, right?
Yes.
But you can't just have the milk. You need the cereal and the fruit.
Exactly.
And the spoon and the fork. And
absolutely.
And bacon.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So I know this is probably a really dumb or maybe arrogant question, but would you say that 100% of the people living on the streets want to get off the streets and back to their old life? Or is there a percentage of people that have just given up and this is the way they're going to live?
That's a great question. And I love how you framed it, because I get the reverse. I get usually, aren't most people service resistant and don't want help? I think a lot of people think that. And I think the first thing I learned in this work is it may be a no for now with people. I like to think back in times of my life where things weren't optimal. It may have been a job, a relationship, a family issue. And sometimes we convince ourselves that it's okay, right? And the mind does a lot to cope.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And so what we do is first what we call meeting people where they're at. So hearing them and understanding what they're feeling, what their dreams are, what their aspirations are. And sometimes the things that we have to offer are not what folks want. And I think it's unfair of us to be these like great protectors, right? Like we know what's best for you.
Exactly.
And so I think we really have to change the narrative of making sure we provide services that meet that person's needs and not what we think they need.
Not imposing our values or opinions upon them.
Absolutely. And so, but also people may have gotten in a rut. They may have gotten in a space where it's hard to see their way out. And so our job is to show alternatives and to provide alternatives and to hear fears and concerns and keep working towards people. And it sometimes starts with an ID, because also the system may have failed them if you come from foster youth or you've been justice involved or whatever. It could be that the system has let you down. And so when I come to you as Joe outreach worker, I'm just part of the system again. So I have to first build trust. And I have to first show that I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. And I'm going to start small in those cases. But so many times, those that are really good at this work, and a lot of people doing outreach are people who experienced homelessness or had family members who are homeless in their past. So they've experienced it firsthand. And so I've seen so many times a person where you're like, there's no way this person is going to see us. But just through continued support and a little bit of luck and a lot of kindness, I've seen people turn it around and say yes. Really? And so that's why I try to change the narrative of remembering all the times we've said no to something because we weren't ready to say yes. But at some point, we often changed our minds. And so our job is to help educate, to listen, to support, and to be there and get a little lucky to be there when the minds are changed. So I say absolutely everybody wants off the streets. What does that look like for them? Shelter might not be for them. We're also doing shelter differently these days, so it might be also helping them to say, well, actually, this shelter's a little smaller. It's low barrier. You don't have to, jump through all these hoops, and try it. And if it doesn't work for you, no harm, no foul. Right. And so for me, it's just helping people try it and also celebrating when they do well, but also being, okay, you tried it, didn't work this time. So what's plan B? What's plan C?
Well, the beautiful thing about that is you offer them hope. It was hope that changes their mind. Like, maybe I can have a better life, maybe I can get off the streets. Maybe I can get a job again,
And don't we all need hope?
Absolutely. Our tagline is never helpless, never hopeless, because our addicts, you can, there's always help for you. Reach out, and you are never hopeless. Like, every life is valuable,
And it's hard when you're in your darkest spaces to see that.
Well,
Absolutely.
we've seen it. We've witnessed addiction firsthand. And the hopelessness is just heartbreaking, So when you extend an olive branch called hope, that's wonderful, and they try it. If it doesn't work out, okay. But you gave them hope,
Absolutely.
to step outside of, that box. Another question I wanted to ask, since there are families on the street, if there's minor children, so say there's a single mom and minors, and maybe a 3-year-old or a 7-year-old or a teenager, at what point does Child Protective Services ever come in and take those kids, house those kids, take care of them? I mean, is that another thing a homeless mother has to deal with?
I think there's a lot of fear around that, but homelessness in itself is not a trigger to call family services. So I think that's really important. What we coach people to do if they are a family with a minor child is to call 211, and they will get connected to our family CES, or Family Coordinated Entry System, to then try to get into some sort of interim housing placement, and then, of course, permanent housing. So that's a really important thing to share. So, but I think people are fearful if they do that, perhaps. But again, we're seeing a lot more families, so the wait times are a lot more. It used to be that pretty much every family that came to us, we could get into some sort of interim situation immediately. And we're just in certain regions, there's not enough motels, there's not enough interim housing. So they're working really hard on the family side to try how do we augment that and make sure even if we are moteling people that there's case management at the motels too, so families can really heal. So really the only time when family services may get called is if you do see true abuse or neglect, and we are all, mandated reporters. So, but in most cases, it's just people, families trying really hard to keep going, and we want to support them in keeping families together. And so that's something, I've only in my 8 years know of one case where we had to do that. In most cases, it's case management and moving people forward.
Okay.
Is it true that technically, so if it was a mom with her kids or whatever, even if they were living in the car, is it true that technically that's not considered homelessness, right?
It's basic housing.
No, it is homelessness.
It is?
Yep.
Okay.
So our definition is through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. And so basically there's different types of homelessness, but the ones where we work intensively are what we call literal homelessness, which are people who are in their cars, RVs, on the streets, in tents. That is all what we call literal homelessness.
Okay.
Then there's what's called at-risk homelessness, which those are people who are couch surfing. They're doubled up in a house, and they may be at risk of being homeless, right? Because they've gotten an eviction. So we do have some programs for folks who are at risk. But if somebody's just doubled up, there's like the school system may consider them homeless if they're at risk, but per our standards in HUD, vehicles do count because it's not meant for human habitation.
Right? Okay.
Right,
Yeah. That's
okay.
what I.
Well, that's it. Not meant for human habitation.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, because I know that, sometimes if you're an addict or whatever, you're in your car, and I always wondered if that was like still technically considered,
Vehicular homelessness is really, it's interesting because it is different than what we see on the streets, especially with so many people falling into homelessness. It's a trajectory, right? You lose your place, then you may couch surf, then you may motel yourself a little bit, then you may do motel and car and kind of back and forth, and then you stay in your car, but then you can't keep up with your registration and car repairs, and so then maybe your car might get towed because it has too many tickets, and then you end up on the streets. So I think the intervention, a lot of people working are in their cars, so the type of supports folks in their cars need sometimes is different. So there's a push to have safe parking on lots, and we do have a number of them throughout the county. Again, it's not nearly enough, but having a space where cars can be safely parked, so they don't get towed and they can get their registration. So these programs often have the ability to update registration, so people can go out and not have fear of citations. So
oh my gosh,
that's
I
another excellent idea
Yeah.
and source of help.
parking lots. That's so smart.
How do people find out about that?
So I can send you guys links that maybe we can send out on some of the things that we talked about today,
that'd be
and
great.
that can help people find some of these various programs. And so an easiest way is Safe Parking LA is one of the big groups that does that, but I can send you all from the showers to Safe Parking to LA Hop to the Family Services Center.
Great.
I mean, I think the average person has no idea about that. I mean, I think that's such a
My
great
mind is
idea
blown.
and so simple and so thoughtful.
it's very thoughtful.
Some really great people getting their heads around this. I'm really blessed to be working with some of the best and the brightest around how do we do this.
Yeah.
So with that being said, on the flip side, I do have a question. When I was listening to you talk, and I, again, because I've been in a personal situation, I totally understand. I have so much empathy, sympathy for people. But so we were talking about how it's case by case, right? And, some people, maybe they want the help or maybe they don't, or maybe they're, you tackle the homelessness first and then whatever else. Do you have anyone ever from the outside or anyone ever like putting a negative spin on it, saying like, well, you're offering them housing, they should just take it and be grateful? Because you know what, I really feel like in the position that I'm in, if I didn't go through my situation, I would not be understanding, compassionate the way that I am. So what, if you have people like that, how do you react and what do you say? What do you tell them? What's your rebuttal?
I get that every day.
Really?
Wow.
Absolutely. I think there's such a, even though it's the most visible issue we have here in Los Angeles, there's such a lack of awareness of those drivers and what it means for people. And I think those who are the most ill are the most visible. And I think so people think that all homelessness looks like that. And I think when it comes to mental health and substance use stigmas, that there is just a huge stigma towards people struggling. And so I am in many, many meetings where people say the vagrants, it's this idea that really homelessness is equated to criminalization. And so that everybody wants to do harm and people don't want help and they're service resistant. And I think it depends to if you're not out there every day, or let's say you're working in law enforcement, the relationship is going to be very different than an outreach worker who is really a case manager on wheels. So what different people are seeing, and let's be honest, our elected officials, our communities are getting a lot of pressure because we shouldn't be living this way.
No, we should not.
And I think our house neighbors are also experiencing a lot of things that people are working really hard to keep their homes nice and are having challenges too. And so I think a minority of issues are making it look like everybody means harm and is ill and on drugs and doesn't want help. I think it's easy to perpetuate that narrative. And then I say, well, if we housed 22,000 people last year, we got a lot of yeses.
Right.
And so I think I'll be as creative as possible to change hearts and minds. First of all, I think we have to hear people. And same thing we do with our clients, with our neighbors, is to hear people, understand where they're at, and try to unpack those myths. Sometimes I'll say, come out with a team. If it's somebody that, it's really important to change minds, come out to a shower program. And so sometimes it's sharing stats, right? And say, well, it's not anecdotal. These are all statistical pieces done by a third party. So same thing, depending on what I hear, I'll chip away. And part of it is building rapport with that person too. If somebody doesn't know me, and we know that the studies show if somebody comes at you with opinions or facts even that go against what you think, you're just going to be resistant. But when you know that person and you've built rapport, they may be more open to what you have to share. And so some of my work is, when you've done this as long as I have, I've been able to build up rapport, and so people might be more open to a different way of looking at it.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's finding new data to support that. There's an idea that if you provide services in an area, that draws people to your community. And so it's helping people understand that this hasn't happened. So showing that service, number of people serving hasn't gone up, and that most of the people come from your neighborhood, and having hard facts to deal with that. and then ultimately showing success stories and having those success stories be from those communities so people can celebrate and realize that, these are our community members.
Right?
And that they are struggling, but also there are solutions. And so it's a big county. There's 88 cities. So it's a lot of changing of hearts and minds, but I will continue to do it until I have no breath left.
Yeah.
You're
Well, I think
amazing.
awareness is everything.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, you taught us so much today that I never would even know
I
about.
never would have known,
Really?
never even would have thought about. Honestly, you really don't know until, you connect with someone, or
Right.
it's crazy.
So what is it going to take to help so many people already on the streets and prevent more people from becoming homeless? What can people listening do to help?
Yeah, so I think we need to scale up a lot of the things that we talked about. So I think inflow is the number one thing. So we have to look at structurally, what is it going to take to address the structural issues to homelessness, structural racism. I haven't mentioned that, but that is something that is driving the epidemic because, if we think about, let's use the opioid crisis. When that was really hitting white communities, it was a public health crisis. Crack cocaine in the 80s and 90s predominantly impacted African American communities, and yet that wasn't a public health crisis. That was a criminal issue. And so we know that people are African American, even that we house, are falling out of housing more quickly. Jobs, we know that somebody with the same resume with a white name versus a black name, the white name is going to get hired or brought in for an interview so many more times. Communities that are predominantly minority are have schools that are not as strong, the access to education, so we have to address that structural issue not first and foremost, because African Americans are disproportionately impacted by homelessness in LA and many communities. And so until we really, really have some difficult conversations of why that is and how to address it, we have to deal with good paying jobs. People cannot live off minimum wage anymore. And so we have to, as we talked about the affordability crisis, we have to have less people falling out of the foster care system. We have to think about, the United States have one of the largest prison populations, and people are being released. But what do we do when they've been incarcerated? And again, the likelihood of getting jobs in a tough workforce when you have that record. So how do we expunge? How do we have programs to get people back into society? So that's just stopping the bleed. And then that way we can focus on those that are on the streets. And I think we have, again, just to show that it is cheaper to house somebody permanently who's experiencing homelessness than to keep them on the streets. Having permanent supportive housing, you can do it and it doesn't impact your community. You can have shelter and it's done well, doesn't impact your community, actually can enhance your community. So it's many, many layers, but we need to do both. I think for a long time we focused only on the homeless response system without looking at what was flowing in. We're also doing a lot of work around diversion, where we want people to not even enter the homeless system. So looking to family. So as you said, people who felt that they burned all their bridges with their family, but how can we re-engage them and see if we can broker some conversations and see what we can do to maybe get families reunited. I think that's something we haven't done enough of. And I think that the better we are at that, because family is number one, and having support networks.
Right.
And it could be cousins, it could be even family friends, but how can we really be a village in this and support each other?
Takes a village.
Yeah.
Really does.
It absolutely does on a problem of this magnitude.
There is drug use, right? Of course
Talked
there
about
is.
that.
We said there's 17%, are using. And so it's there. And of course, people who use drugs are likely to coalesce around each other. It's just the way encampments are. Some may have more drug use than others. And so, but like we said, we address everything ad hoc. So if it's an encampment that has high drug use, we're aware of it, and we tailor our approaches to that. But every person experiencing homelessness and drug use are all different. So their willingness or being ready to address, like I said, their needs,
Case by case.
it's case by case. And so we, just like there could be a lot of people with physical health issues, and so we're going to address it case by case too. So same thing, addiction is no different. It's challenging. It's definitely tough. And of course we are piloting getting Narcan out into the hands of our outreach workers to then pilot giving that to people experiencing homelessness to administer in encampments also. So we just did a pilot up in Antelope Valley and down in Coyote Creek down in Southeast LA, and uptake was very high. Folks in those encampments absolutely wanted Narcan. They wanted training, and were willing then to have it. So if somebody in their encampment or in their area needed it, that they were ready.
Right.
And of course, our teams ourselves carry it. So if we do see somebody who's having, who might be potentially ODing, that they are trained also. So that's actually relatively new too. Again, that only works for opioids, and we know that in LA, the opioid crisis isn't as severe as in other areas, so it could be something else, but our teams are trained in that. So
That's great.
absolutely. But I think, community is community, and I think when we're working with encampments, we want to understand what that community is and tailor our approach. And so there's negative things on a community, and then there's what I call protective factors. And so I'm always trying to look at the protective factors. I'm looking at the safety concerns. If there are people preying upon people, if I hear about that, that's when I'll get law enforcement involved, because, that's really important. And if it's just general using, we're aware of it. And of course, but client by client, we'll try to address what they're ready to do. And I think what we've seen when we have this approach, when they see us not judging people for their use, and they're expecting it because they've had that their whole life. And they say, sometimes people will shock you, like, tried it, and they see that we don't flinch. We're like, okay, thank you for telling us. That must have been hard for you to share that. We did a needle exchange pilot, and a gentleman was shocked that we were providing clean needles, and said, wow, he felt seen. And so people who feel seen, and feel non-judged, are willing to maybe think through other alternatives later on when they're ready. We all know when somebody tells us not to do something, what do?
We do it.
We do it as fast as we can.
Exactly.
And let's be honest, I came from a model of being told what not to do. And so when I tried it, when I started this work, I learned real quickly the wagging of the finger and saying don't do it is a waste of everyone's time.
Exactly. That's exactly what I mean.
Work.
You house 22,000 people. It makes me wonder if you took a different approach, like everyone else says, we're offering you something, you're either going to take it or not. It really makes me wonder if that number would go down, as opposed to your approach and just, you know what I mean? Like, hey, we're here for you and we're here to listen to you. We're not here to force anything on you. I think that's the one big thing that some people really have a hard time with, that they don't understand. But it's just like, every person is different, and you just have to feel out every person to know how they're going to be. You can't just, like I said, you can't take one way and try and force it upon a bunch of people. Yeah. And I really think that's why you had so much success last year, the approach that you're taking.
And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This work is really hard. Mm-hmm. And for every success, you know, we lose people every day.
Absolutely.
Addiction, mental health, poverty, physical health. It's really, really, really hard. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and the compounding of these issues is super challenging. And so I don't want to act also like we've got the magic bullet or we've figured it out, because ultimately we win some and we lose some. And when we lose some, as you've experienced firsthand, it is soul crushing. Mm-hmm. And it, you know, I woke up to my Monday morning with another client who passed away on the streets, and I don't know the cause. You know, he was quite fragile. It could have been overdose. It could have been his physical health. It could have been compounding issues. So the struggle is real, and I wish it was easier, but there also is hope. And I think I want people to know that you can heal and you can get better, and it's not easy, and the resources are limited, the supports in general, but it's not hopeless. And I think just the average person doesn't know that there's many people who address their addictions, their demons, and can heal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So if people wanted to help out in some way, does the LA Homeless Services Authority have places on their website where people can
donate and things?
Well, I don't know. Donate for sure,
well,
but just
their time
a list of people who we could donate to.
Yeah, we do. And I can send you that link on our website. And another volunteer opportunity is we do a homeless count every January, and we need thousands of volunteers to go out and count on usually a cold, dark January night. And that data I use every day to make decisions. We have to do it through HUD. It's also how we allocate funding. It's also, it's probably a poor analogy, but I call it the gateway drug to being a homeless warrior and to be supportive, because when you see your own neighborhood and you connect to it, I think it's a really important way of getting engaged. Mm-hmm. So that's something, again, it's a while from now, but it'll be January before we know it. But also just, the site has a number of homeless services organizations, but you may have one in your neighborhood that supports youth or older adults. So I just urge everyone to support. But I also think really getting involved politically is really the place to be. Decisions are being made every day that impact all the things that I said. And so a lot of voices are against some of these strategies, and they're often the only ones who show up. And so if people believe in this and they want to be, they can also participate in the Everyone In campaign, which is amazing organizational entity through the United Way. And I can send you that link too, but they're about really mobilizing community to say yes. And you might see their signs up around town. And I know in Venice, I'll see them where it says Homes End Homelessness. And they're really trying to get the word out there and to be YIMBYs, which is yes in my backyard versus NIMBYs not in my backyard.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Great.
I love that. And 100%, like you said, it's really just about starting the conversation and spreading this awareness, because half of I'm just blown away by everything that you shared with me today. And I know for a fact if I was to go talk to my friends or whatever, they would not know any of this. So that's how it all starts, just talking and spreading awareness.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that with us. And in closing, can you give us the website address for your organization?
Absolutely. It's www.LAHSA.org, and that's LAHSA.org. And I think people can check out the homeless count data. I think that's really important. The first thing on the page is a PowerPoint that goes through why we're here, what are the influencers of homelessness, what we're doing to address it, and has information in their neighborhoods too of what homelessness looks like. You can also sign up for, we have a really great Facebook account and Instagram account too. So I urge you to do that too. And then also following, your local organizations, everyone in, and also your political leaders, and see what they're saying about this also, and be informed about their policy decisions.
Definitely.
Right. Well, excellent. Thank you so much for all this information. And anybody wanting more information can go to your website and, get everything they need. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much
Thanks,
for your
Colleen.
time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
You just heard the podcast $20, produced by Rose and Rebecca Castro and Bernadette Quay, recorded at the New Media Agency Studios in Los Angeles.